Hi and welcome back to another sky practice. Today I'm going to be painting a sunset and painting it nice and quick, nice and easy using the wet in wet technique with two colours. I'm using Cotman Prussian Blue and Vermilion by Royal Langnickel. My paper is Milford 100% cotton paper. It's taped to my board with decorator's masking tape and my board's at an angle of about 45 degrees so I can get a nice run and gravity will help me to paint. I'm using my large Chinese bamboo haki brush to wet the paper and then I shall mix up my colours, my Prussian blue and my vermilion, and get them across the page in nice thick strips of paint, sort of horizontally oriented. And then I'll tip and tilt my board until I get the kind of look that I want. You can see this vermilion is beautiful. It's lovely and rich and strong. It's got quite a sort of an orangey look to it, which is why, even though it's quite a sort of a cheap watercolour paint, I'm very, very fond of it. I think it works really, really beautifully with the dark blues like Prussian blue and indigo. You can see that the paint's running down the page and I just sprayed it with my misting spray as well to increase that run. And now I'm turning my board 90 degrees so that I stop the paint from running down towards the bottom of the painting, and I'm maintaining the kind of horizontal orientation of the flow of the paint, which will end up giving me a really nice sky and sea. I can tidy up a little bit as the painting's on its side, just maybe tidy up and bring some of the brush strokes over the edge of the paper if they haven't quite got there. And then I'm laying it flat for a little while just to let the washes settle. I want everything still to be wet because there's still more work to do, but just letting it settle. And now it's settled, you can see that some of the paint is slowly running down the page, and that gives me quite an interesting effect as well. Controlling washes like this with lots of paint and lots of water and tipping and tilting can be harder than it looks to start with. But if you like the kind of look of this sort of fresh, spontaneous, simple sky, then it's worth practicing and worth putting up with a few disasters. I mean, I've had many disasters. I still have them on an almost daily basis, but that's part of the fun because you never know when you're going to get a sky wash that you really, really like and that you can use in future paintings. This is a clean, damp 3/4 inch flat brush, and I'm using it to lift out a horizon line. Because now I've got my sky in place, I'm just going to add a few more details once it's dry and just turn it into a slightly more finished looking seascape. But I do want to stress when you're painting a sky like this that it's really important to get to a point where you like it and then to stop and not actually touch the sky at all. So I won't be doing any more to the sky, maybe putting some birds in at the very end. But these washes are, even though they're not perfect, they're a bit streaky in places, maybe a bit heavy in paint in some areas, but to me it's fresh, it's exciting, and so I shall leave it to dry flat completely. I'd rather have a sky that looks like this and that's imperfect but that has that sort of freshness to it than one that looks overworked and muddy. I think one of the hardest things about learning to paint wet in wet watercolour skies is knowing when to stop and when to just leave it alone and not fiddle. But it's like other things with watercolour painting, it's well worth learning to restrain yourself from overworking. It's nice and dry and I'm pleased with the way it looks. It's actually a little bit brighter than this because the sun's coming in through the windows of my studio. I'm just going to dry brush some blue across, Prussian blue it is, the same colour, across the bottom of my painting, and I'm going to just work on the water a little bit just to get a bit more depth, a bit more suggestions of it being a sort of very, really calm sea that's reflecting some of the orange glow from this sunset. This is when a flat brush really comes into its own, because you can use it to apply the paint and to move it around just using the tips of the flat brush and horizontal sweeps. So you can sort of feather the flat brush through. You can also clean it and dry it and lift out paint for highlights and all sorts of things like that. Again, it's a technique that takes a little bit of practice, but it can be really useful for all kinds of water effects. Just getting in some nice darks here. I'm trying not to cover up all of the white sparkle that of unpainted paper showing through the brushwork from the original washes. Those of you that have seen my painting before know that I do like to keep quite a bit of unpainted paper if I can, particularly in water, to keep it looking sort of very fresh. I'm trying to use the flat brush with very minimal amounts of paint to get some tiny, smaller marks across in the distance, so it sort of looks as if the water is sort of stretching back further towards the horizon line, and keeping those marks sort of stronger the closer we are to the foreground of the water. And this is where, with a painting like this, you can do as little or as much work on it as you like. I won't do much more. I think it's nearly finished. For me, this was an exercise in trying to keep that orange glow in the sky and have the sort of interesting variation in the tones, and to keep the sky really light yet still having that sort of evening look to it. But you could add boats here on the horizon, you could add a headland, maybe a bit of beach across one of the corners. The possibilities here, again, are virtually endless. It's an interesting technique, and also fluent and fresh looking transparent skies are really important in watercolour landscape painting, which is one of the reasons that I practice them so much. For my own paintings, in other words, paintings that I paint for myself and for my Etsy shop, and not for demonstrations. The sky is the most important thing. I often find, as a lot of my artist friends do, that if the sky goes right, the rest of the painting falls into place a lot more easily. If I struggle with my sky, then I sometimes struggle with the painting as a whole. So this is one of the reasons that I encourage people who are learning to practice their skies as much as possible, and to try out a full range of skies. And that way you'll be able to paint really beautiful, well-rounded paintings, whether your sky is the main feature or whether you just want a very soft sky and a dominant landscape. The more you practice, the easier it will be to succeed when you paint. Right, I think I'm going to finish this off with a few birds. I've got a bright orange spot there, so I think that's an ideal position for a seagull. So I've changed to indigo here. It's in a sort of similar colour register to my Prussian blue. So I think it'll work better than Payne's grey or black. I'm just going to simply put in a few seagulls across the sky, and then finish the seagulls off here and there with a little bit of white gouache for some highlights. And I'm going to call that finished. As I said before, sky practice is something that the more you practice, the more you will find what pleases you about the look of a sky. And that way you'll find your own style of painting skies, and that's completely unique to you. I started off copying or being inspired by the skies of other artists, and now I'm pretty much go my own way a lot of the time, and I just experiment and I explore and I just play with ideas. Some work, most don't, to be honest. Lots of my ideas are complete and absolute failures, but it doesn't stop me trying. And I'm hoping that I can sort of get that across, that the more you experiment and don't mind when things go wrong, the more you will progress with your watercolour painting. And also, don't strive necessarily for perfection all the time. As I say, this one's got a few sort of unsightly marks and streaks, and the sea's not great, but I absolutely love the red glow, the orangey red glow across the sky, some of the paler blue parts, and some of the subtle transitions of colour across the sky. So for me, it's a success, even though it's not perfect. So if you can try and sort of see what you really like about your paintings, even ones that don't work completely, and that way you'll be able to use those lessons that you learn in your next paintings and try and avoid the things that you don't like. So here's the finished painting with its clean white border, and I think I've got a big gap there. One more bird I think would just balance out the composition a little bit more. Sometimes I just see things like that, and if it only takes a couple of seconds to change, I'll just quickly change something, because then it just, for me, balances things out a lot more, even though it's just a tiny mark. Well, I hope that was helpful, and I hope you'll give it a go and keep practicing. And if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, as that really helps my reach. And thank you so much to my lovely Patreon group who support this channel. I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.